Hello, this is Lisa Bowen, breathing coach at Breathing Retraining Center in the San Francisco Bay Area. Welcome. Today I'm talking about off-season breathing training for athletes. The off-season for any athlete is their downtime, the time when no events and no trainings are scheduled. What's great about concentrating on your breathing fitness in the off-season is that you have the time to slow down and pull your breathing pattern apart, examine it, and recreate it better to be more efficient, more functional. The period of November to March is the typical off-season for endurance athletes, runners, and cyclists in particular. Before I go any further, please bear with me as I share a disclaimer. I'm not a licensed medical or healthcare professional. Always check with a physician about any breathing difficulty you're experiencing, especially if it's acute or new, as that could be a warning sign of a life-threatening heart or lung condition, infection, or other illness. My job is I'm a health and wellness coach teaching self-management tools to identify and correct poor breathing habits that have the potential to be improved as a self-care wellness activity, with the blessing of your doctor. There's more information at breathingretrainingcenter.com/disclaimer. There's also a list of contraindications at breathingretrainingcenter.com/contraindications. So what is breathing fitness? It's the experience of breathing easily despite doing something physically demanding. When we exercise, we're challenging ourselves in two ways. We're exercising our muscles and we're exercising our respiratory system. How often have you concentrated on your muscles, not giving any thought to your breathing? As we'll go over later, for best performance, we should be warming up, training, and cooling down our respiratory system every workout. It's as important as stretching your calves and your hamstrings. Now, how do we develop breathing fitness? Pretty much like we build any skill. We assess where we are currently, and then on purpose push the difficulty a manageable amount, hard but doable, until that level or skill or exertion becomes easy, and then we push it again, over and over. It's very similar to how a trainer at a gym gets you ready to do a full push-up or pull-up in easy progressive steps over time. You can take that first step of measuring your breathing in many ways. The gold standard is your comfortable breath hold time, and we'll talk more about that soon. It can also be as folksy as counting how many jumping jacks you can do nasal breathing only with your mouth shut. That's something anybody can do anytime, anywhere with little fanfare. Write the number down, start doing some of the breathing exercises I'm going to recommend later, and then do another test a month later and see if that number has increased. I'll bet it has. Now, one of the most successful public examples of breathing training comes from the 1968 U.S. track and field team. In 1968, the games were held in Mexico City, the highest location for the games on record. The track and field team hired Carl Stowe, a famous vocal coach, a choral director, to help them build their chops. Okay, you can see the green bar here shows the altitude of Mexico City at 7,382 feet. Highest games on record. The track and field team was really on top of things that year. In addition to hiring the breathing coach, they set up a training camp just south of Lake Tahoe, California at Echo Summit, a mountain pass over the Sierras. At 7,300 feet, Echo Summit closely matches the elevation of Mexico City. The camp opened in July, the men's track and field trials were held there in September, and then they all went to the games in October. Here you can see an athlete from another country on oxygen. He collapsed during a race due to the high altitude. And it was a real risk. But this team really practiced hard. Between breathing training and the pre-adjustment to high altitude, they made Olympic history, the U.S. team, winning 12 gold medals out of 24 and setting 6 world records during the course of the games. The women's team won 3 gold medals out of 12. In this video, I'm going to describe how to simulate high altitude training. That is, how to replicate the benefits of training at high altitude, even if you're at sea level, and how you can use the principles to strengthen your breathing wherever you are. If you want to start training your breathing, the first step is to take a benchmark. The most universal breathing fitness test is the comfort pause. That's how long you can hold your breath comfortably, in seconds. This breath hold has many names, including the Buteyko control pause. The Oxygen Advantage calls this same interval the body oxygen level test. Whatever you want to call it, it's a measure that shows how long you can hold your breath comfortably. And the operative word is comfortably. I remember as a kid, when I was a passenger in a car driving through a tunnel, I tried to hold my breath the whole way, even if I turned blue in the face. This ain't that. That's actually called a maximum pause. Notice in this illustration that the amplitude of the breaths right before and after the breath hold are the same. The first breath you take after the breath hold should not be a gasp. If you have to majorly recover after the breath hold, we assume you started to get uncomfortable a little bit earlier than you thought and kept going anyway. It was more like a max, and that's not what we're measuring for the comfort pause. I want to mention that taking this measurement can affect your blood gases and potentially cause lightheadedness and other symptoms if you're not used to doing it. So don't do it lightly or alone, especially if you are in poor shape. The longer you can hold your breath comfortably, the better, the healthier you're considered to be. Many people in our modern culture who are inactive or mouth breathe a lot have comfort pauses under 20 seconds, with a good number even under 10 or 12 seconds. These days, given how sedentary we've become, 30 seconds is considered a very basic floor, and 40 is almost the new normal. A Ukrainian doctor in the old Soviet Union, now Russia, named Konstantin Buteyko, was active in studying all things breathing from the 1950s to the 1990s. He was the one who developed this breathing test and published conclusions about what the results meant with this chart, called the Buteyko Table of Health Zones. Buteyko considered the breath hold time as significant as the pulse or blood pressure for screening health status. He rated 60 seconds as normal. Okay, I could do a whole presentation just on this chart, and actually I think I'm going to someday. But right now, I really only want to talk about the correlations here. So first, I want you to notice that he separates people's breathing into diseased, normal, and then they're super healthy. And for him, normal is when you can hold your breath at 60 seconds. Now, I know from other studies that in general, people who have studied these things talk about how you have to exercise about 2.5 hours a day to basically be able to reach and maintain this level of being able to hold your breath for 60 seconds. We'll go into the modern challenge these days. You know, what we call exercise, people used to call work, right? Buteyko was doing all this in Russia 80 years ago. In Siberia, people were living very different lives. They weren't sitting working on the computer so much. We actually have to create time to exercise. So it's a different ball game. But let's talk about the correlations here. So basically, so health goes up as your ability where it says CP to hold your breath increases. Now, coming over to the left here, your pulse tends to go down as your health increases, your resting pulse. And the number of breaths you take per minute decreases. So basically, people who take longer breaths would be healthier under this. But there is breathing volume of air that I'll talk about later. Okay, as people are more healthy, they're breathing less per minute. They're able to have more carbon dioxide tolerance in their lungs. And also, this AP, I can't remember what AP stands for, but what it is so typically we inhale, we exhale, and then there's a pause at the end of the breath before we take the next breath. People who have more respiratory health tend to take a longer pause. So if you are taking 8 breaths per minute, and you can generally hold your breath for about 60 seconds, this chart says that basically at the end of each breath, you would just kind of naturally hold your breath for 4 seconds. And this chart was basically compiled by watching a heck of a lot of people and taking samples of their blood and testing the blood gases and coming to these determinations. So what I want you to take away, again, at another time, I'll go into more details here, but that basically holding your breath longer is considered healthier or more functional. And if you think about it, it makes sense. It's more efficient. People who have to breathe every 5 seconds use an incredible percentage of their overall energy to breathe. So if you can last longer without taking a breath, that's more efficient. You can talk more before you have to take the next breath. You can chew a big bite longer. You can run longer in between breaths. When you're exercising, you're not panting. It's very practical. Okay, so now I want to start talking about how to maximize breathing health and efficiency. And these are the 3 steps you take. First, you start breathing less. And this is why it's really good to do it in the off season, because you want to, typically people will start breathing less seated in a sedentary way, and then they'll do it with light movement and then heavier movement and then to sprinting, right? It's a progression. So that's why when we're going to start breathing less, we want to do it at a gentle pace, and that lends itself to the off season. In general, we also want to breathe through our nose, and I'll talk about that a little bit why. And then it's not enough, because so many people are breathing so much through their mouths. It's not enough to just start breathing through your nose. You have to intentionally stop breathing through your mouth, or it's not just going to happen. We're taking 20,000 breaths a day. So you got to practice both ends of that equation. Now let's really pull apart this mouth breathing thing. As you've probably experienced, when you start getting winded, you naturally start mouth breathing, or panting is the specific word in that case. And this can also happen with an emotional shock. When people get stressed, they start mouth breathing more. It's called hyperventilation. And in an everyday way, mouth breathing can be considered an expression of lack of fitness for a situation, whether that's a physical situation, exercising harder than you actually are in shape for, or an emotional situation. And the people who flock to breathing training, typically they might have been diagnosed with anxiety or asthma, but there is a relationship there in the expression of a lack of fitness. So many people and athletes think when they mouth breathe, they're getting more oxygen, right? Well, you're sure getting more air, but that's about where that ends, because what happens is that the oxygen is not getting absorbed into the lungs. You know, you're breathing in and out very rapidly, kind of like air going in and out of an accordion. Well, that doesn't mean it's getting absorbed. It's being flapped in and out. It's actually the longer duration nose breath that allows air the time to steep into all those little bronchioles in the lower lungs and reach the diaphragm rather than stopping in the chest. Our caveman bodies automatically mobilize for fight or flight when our mouths are open. That's an automatic reaction of the reptilian brain, home of the breathing control center. So, however it starts, mouth breathing prompts the blood immediately to start flowing away from the head and digestive organs into the limbs so we can defend ourselves physically. And the whole thing was designed to last a couple minutes to provide us, in a physical emergency, the ability to create a burst of energy either to fight or to flee. And many mammals operate like this. But, our human bodies haven't adapted yet to all the things we can worry about, and reasonably so, in our current environment. Like, somebody might start worrying now about next tax season, or, fears brought up by seeing something scary on TV, where they might have loved ones halfway around the world. So I wanted to go into how the reasonable mouth breathing that might start in this fight or flight state when we're in it all the time starts creating chronic health problems. So let's just pull a couple of these out. The first one on the left, there's an immediate benefit when you start mouth breathing and you go into that fight or flight state. You don't have to go to the bathroom. Well, that's great if you got to run from a bear. But think if it goes on and on and on. All of a sudden, the chronic consequence, you're starting to face farting and constipation. Maybe your stomach hurts. Okay, so what was good for 2 minutes is not good for 2 years. Okay, then the whole idea of the second bullet point on the left, oxygenated blood flows to the arms and legs to run away or fight. Great idea. But in a sustained way, it's like, hey, let's have some oxygen to the brain and the digestive system and other maintenance organs, right? Your arms and legs can't always be ready to go. Sometimes, like the third bullet, you want your body, mind, spirit to be mobilized. You want to be perceptive. So the immediate benefit of this body, mind, spirit mobilization is that all your senses are on. You're hyper aware of what's going on around you, as you would be in an emergency. Well, under chronic consequences, number 3, that doesn't really lend itself to relaxing and getting to sleep. So after some time of being in that state without a break, you can imagine that insomnia might result. So here's what's going on when you're mouth breathing constantly, not just for that biological benefit. Last one, when we're mouth breathing, our muscles contract to work, right? Anything that our muscles do when they're tight means that they're working. So even though my shoulders are killing me and, they go up to my head, when I am working on the computer too much or I'm stressed, that's great when you're about to run, but the chronic consequence is that they're always tight, including around the airway, the organs, any tube in the body. So this is just another one of those cases where, an adaptation, which is good for the initial intention, kind of goes in the wrong direction. Okay, so what we really want to do is stop mouth breathing in case of these, or I should say, except in these cases of emergency. And I'm glad you're here because mouth breathing is so common that most people don't even realize that, it's not necessarily appropriate. We're not supposed to be mouth breathing when we're talking, when we're eating. it's biologically for a very specific situation that we are very rarely in. And so many people pant, huff, and puff that, I mean, we're seeing our newscasters do it, people in movies, that yeah, we're not even aware. So we've got to totally re-educate ourselves. And people who are out of shape, sick and congested, or under stress, if you notice, they tend to mouth breathe a lot. And over time, if you've been breathing a lot that way, your body might have adapted too. And so that's another reason why you've got to practice. Form follows function. A lot of people, the shape of their airway has changed, or if they started mouth breathing as kids, it's grown in a different way than it could have. And it's got to be worked with. Just like you might go to physical therapy, there is a new special profession called myofunctional therapy, where they work with the muscles of the throat and the mouth and the tongue. And people with sleep apnea go to them specifically. Children who have need orthodontia will go see them and learn how to work with these muscles, assess their airway, and see what they can do with neuromuscular exercises or appliances to basically work with this capacity more than what I'm going to suggest. I'm going to be giving the some very general suggestions that are pretty much safe for everybody. And just like anything, if the YouTube ideas don't work for you, then you go see a professional. So just remember that mouth breathing is not normal. Even though we're able to breathe through our mouths, we're designed to breathe in and out through our noses, except in rare case of emergency. I've got some wonderful videos about defensive breathing, and I also give group talks on it. But basically, nasal breathing protects us from germs. Our noses release nitric oxide, which is very helpful in neutralizing viruses, which has been in the news lately. And also the cilia in our nose and snot, for that matter, catch particles and pollutants. So nasal, we're built to nasal breathe, and that is our breathing organ, not our mouth. So that's super important. This is a fantastic book about how Native Americans trained their young runners to do nasal breathing, and it's really a wonderful book about horses didn't even arrive for Native Americans to use until, I want to say, I don't think it was right in the 1700s when the English came. It seems to me like you start seeing it in the history books around the 1800s. So anyway, the point being that these folks were really running to get around and hunt and everything until the introduction of horses. And they were excellent runners, and they were trained very well. I know that they trained with water in their mouths. They ran long distances with water, and so they would not open their mouth at all. It's a fantastic read. Okay, last point is that, and this is also seems to be a very little known fact, that people today are breathing about twice as much air as they did 100 years ago. And let's go into that. This is a fantastic chart put together by a colleague, Dr. Artur Rakimov, in Toronto, Canada. And you can see this chart and his comments at normalbreathing.com. Whoops. But the bottom line is that, doctors know, or medical researchers know, that it is normal for a human being, and they have a particular statistic. The normal-sized man who's a certain height and a certain weight will breathe about 6 liters of air per minute. And when doctors are looking at breathing health, that is what they're looking at, the volume of air that someone breathes per minute in a pattern. So anyway, that was the norm, and it's still the norm as far as current books talk. We haven't changed that much biologically in 100 years. But anyway, so this chart shows that in medical studies, they tested the control groups, and in 1929, they were breathing an average of 4.9 liters per minute. And then in 1939, it had gone up a little bit to 5.3. Whoops again. And so on. It started going up after World War II. And then in the 90s, it got into the 12 category and has pretty much been there and beyond ever since. And so basically people are breathing now twice as much as they used to by volume, which we call chronic hidden hyperventilation, which means people are overbreathing, but they don't realize it. Okay, so that's all to say that the transition from mouth breathing to nasal breathing really has to be done over time. This is pretty much a long-term project that has great benefits. And why should we be doing this? Well, why are mouth breathing stress breathing? Stress breathing is mouth breathing. And what's going on is that modern conditions are contributing to us not breathing innately as healthy as we could. Many people think that we reflexively know how to breathe appropriately, but in the last century, the human environment changed dramatically, and our breathing has, quite frankly, deteriorated as a large group of people due to factors including unhealthy diets, lack of exercise, remember that 2.5 hours a day statistic, and airtight dwellings. I mean, basically, unless we do something to counter it, many of our current habits aren't that healthy. So we really need to increase our muscle tone, our circulation, eat less processed foods, because processed foods take more oxygen to process, so we need to breathe more. Sleeping on soft beds and in heated homes seems to take more oxygen to process. Not following the natural rhythms of day and night, now that we have electricity, electric lights, telephones, 24/7 internet access. Try taking a teenager's smartphone away from her at 9:30. It's my personal example. So anyway, yeah. So Dr. Buteyko said in the 1950s that if we were all exercising for 4 hours a day, most people who have breathing conditions wouldn't. Now, like I said, our researchers these days have shown that somebody needs to exercise basically a minimum of 2.5 hours a day to get to that ability to hold their breath for 60 seconds as far as, that level of respiratory health. So, because of all this, we breathing educators often presume a new client will fit the overbreathing model unless we hear a reason to the contrary. And most of those reasons are listed on the contraindications page that I mentioned at breathingretrainingcenter.com. So that's the reason the corrective breathing formula advises we practice breathing less, is because so many of us are breathing more. And so as a rule of thumb, the more someone, how do you breathe less? Well, what you do is you start breathing gently and small. Inhaling just enough oxygen to metabolize food into energy to fuel the activity of the moment. Okay, so how are we going to do this? How are we going to start breathing less? Well, the first thing is you've got to be aware of how often you're opening your mouth. And this is like I said, a project. You will start to notice, oh, when I tie my shoes, when I lean over, I open my mouth. When I get out of the car, I open my mouth. I notice, oh, when I'm talking, I tend to breathe through my mouth. Even when I was pretty deep into my nasal breathing, I always notice when I go get my teeth cleaned and my mouth's open, I might start breathing through it. I mean, it's just very easy to do. And it's great to observe people. Right now, December 2020, where I am, we're not out and about very much. We're staying at home as much as possible because of the coronavirus, but watch on TV. It's not a secret. Okay, so I'm going to talk about activities, how we can practice breathing with our nose, stop breathing with your mouth, and breathe less. This is a great book. It was a bestseller a couple years ago, James Clear's Atomic Habits. He talks about, make small changes, a little bit every day can create big, remarkable results. So his general premise is to do something 1% better every day. So in our case, that would be breathe 1% less every day. So how might you do that? Well, you breathe. If you're breathing with your mouth a lot, if you've assessed that you're a regular mouth breather, what you would do is try and breathe less through your mouth. Just breathe 1% less. And as you get to the point where you're a little bit more comfortable breathing less, then you can try breathing with your nose more. And at a certain point, you're going to transition to breathing with your nose more than breathing with your mouth. So it's a process. What did someone say? It's not an on and off switch, it's a dimmer switch. Okay, so this is just an illustration showing how you get further taking lots of small steps, that people might even make fun of you for taking such small steps, but you get further. All right, another idea, breathe with a Kleenex stuffed in your nose. If you do that, you'll just be breathing half. Okay, so obviously that's a lot more than a 1% reduction. But it's just an idea of how you can be going about your life. And, oh, let's try this, just to make me aware of my breathing and breathe more gently. I've done this after I had been working with my breathing for quite a while, when I was just in the car, and I wasn't going to pass anybody I know. All right, another option for breathing less is just to start breathing gently. Really be aware of the gradations of breathing. Here we see a little mouse trying to not be noticed, I would imagine. And how do we not be noticed? Well, we don't move our body. And of course, that can get super subtle. A lot of heavy breathers are breathing, their chest is going in and out, their shoulders are going up and down, they're kind of heaving their torso with their breaths. Do that a little bit less until you're not moving your body at all when you breathe. And again, of course, I'm making an assumption that you're not really moving, that you're not climbing Mount Everest. When you're sitting watching TV, you don't need a lot of air to maintain your body. So that's when you're breathing gently. When I talk into how athletes train, yes, they start taking all these things I'm talking about and doing them when they're moving quite fast, but that's advanced. So at the beginning, when you're working at your computer, when you're in the kitchen, grating carrots or whatever, you start breathing more gently than you have previously. You don't make any sounds. You're not sighing a lot. As an example is the idea of a sniff. Like a sniff is not a gentle motion, right? Because you can hear it. I'm going to sniff. Okay, so what's happening there? It's a big breath and it's a very high velocity breath. So that's not gentle. Breathing gently is like breathing, you passed a blossom tree, and oh boy, did that smell good. And so you walk back, and you know how you have to just kind of take a gentle whiff to catch the scent again. Or if you're trying to smell the bouquet of a wine, it's a gentle whiff. That's the opposite of a sniff. So this is one of those things you've just got to experiment with, is what breathing gently is for you and how you notice it. Excuse me. So now it's interesting, to practice breathing gently when you're under stress, because remember, stress breathing is mouth breathing. Have some water. So I basically pulled these pictures because these people made me feel stressed, but you can see that they also have their mouths open. So there really is something to this. Okay, so it's really easy to practice gentle breathing, to practice light breathing, because so many times we're waiting. When you're in traffic, you can practice your breathing. When you're waiting for your morning coffee water to boil, you can practice your breathing. Or when you're waiting in line to get into a store, easy peasy. So another area to go down is to be aware of when your mouth is open. A lot of mouth breathing is very subtle. The picture of this guy eating a burger is not one of those times, but there are many people who just never close their mouth. There's always, even if it's just a millimeter gap, if you really start looking at people, there are some people whose mouths are never closed. And actually, those myofunctional therapists have exercises for them to strengthen their lips. But the first step is just awareness. So this fellow, look how much food he's got in his mouth. So he is probably, his mouth's open. At a certain point, he's probably going to breathe because he's taken such a big bite of food, he's not going to be able to process it, chew it, and swallow it and everything in one breath cycle. So start being aware. Is your mouth open? And it's for mouth breathers, it's frequently your mouth breathing when your mouth is open. So when you're talking, eating, exercising, or even watching TV, when people can kind of get a little bit slack, literally, it's very possible that they are mouth breathing. Now, another time that we open our mouths, when we start really watching what we're doing, is when we need a little burst of energy and we're not in good respiratory shape. So getting in and out of the car, that's a big movement. Or getting up from the chair, getting in and out of the shower. That's kind of like getting into a cold swimming pool or a lake or a river. There's that shock. And then again, remember, fight or flight, we open our mouth. It's a signal to mobilize. So bending down to tie your shoes, put your socks on. Again, it's a big movement that takes some physical fitness. So if you're not physically fit, many people might be opening their mouths. So start observing. Okay, at this point, I would like to talk about what advanced breathing training looks like, just to give you a taste of it. Once you start just observing when you're mouth breathing, when you're nose breathing, when you're breathing heavily, and you start tightening that up through a progression of activities. And how you make it tangible is to take notes and to really see yourself improving. So now I'm just going to get to my notes here, because this is a little bit more technical. Okay. Yeah. So I want to say that this is not for beginners, what I'm going to talk about now, unless you're a proficient nasal breather already. We don't start with this, and that's just another reason why it's very nice to be doing this when you're not stressed in the off season. So I wanted to talk about what a breathing training regimen might look like over time. So you start just getting the nasal breathing down when you're not moving, and you practice breathing less by holding your breath for a second or two when you can. Just the idea of breathing less. So you're breathing with your nose, you're stopping breathing with your mouth, and you're breathing less. You're working on these 3 different skills kind of independently, but then you can mix and match them. It's actually quite fun, and there's a lot of variety to it if you're someone who needs variety. So you're doing these skills in a sedentary way. And, maybe when you do your housework, obviously we're not sitting all day. When you walk to the bathroom and back, or you walk to get a snack and back, or whatever, you might be aware of how you're breathing when you stand up, when you walk to the refrigerator, when you walk back. But after a while, that gets a little stale, right? So then you work into this intermediate category where you're exercising lightly. So then you concentrate on nasal breathing while you're walking or doing light jogging. And when you start, you're going to get winded pretty fast. You're going to want to mouth breathe. And at that point, you walk or stop as needed, catch your breath, and then you do it again. And just like anything, you progress a little bit further every day, and then you're in much better shape. Now, the advanced category, like that 1968 Olympic track and field team, what'd they do? Well, what they did to simulate high altitude when there isn't as much oxygen in the air is that they artificially reduce the oxygen. Well, how do they do that? They do it with breath holds. So what someone in the advanced stage would do would be to warm up with breath holds, work out with breath holds, and cool down with breath holds. So that's how it works. And let's talk a little bit more about the simulated high altitude training. Okay, there's less oxygen at higher altitudes. So what can we do to train our breathing for tougher environments is to intentionally reduce the breathing. Now remember, at this point, you're always reducing the breathing. You're aware of that because you did it a lot when you were sitting around, and then you started doing it walking from the car to Target. It's a natural progression. Well, then what you start doing is breathing less when you're running, and you try and relax while you're running. So this is the opposite of huffing and puffing. So you're training, feeling comfortable, even relaxed when you're doing your sport. You're not holding your fists. You're not holding yourself tight. You're in the zone. And so basically you have at that point worked up to being able to withstand a certain lack of oxygen that at the beginning would bring up fear. And I think this is why you have to kind of do this slowly and methodically, is because there is a fear factor when you feel like you're not getting that as much air as you need, right? This is the human existential fear in a way. So basically, as we gain more control over our ability to modulate our breathing, and especially if we're doing it on purpose, right? For a short period of time that we know we have complete control over ending, we lose that sense of fear when we start breathing less on purpose. So that, in a way, is why you can't really accelerate this work beyond your capacity. that is where you can't take a shortcut, is just on increasing your skill level and reducing your fear level. Yeah, it's the breath control. If you think about it, like the East Indian yogis really concentrated on mastering their breath, between the fire breath, which is the opposite of what we're talking about. They're over breathing on purpose. Here, we're under breathing on purpose. In our case, we're doing it to get back to what would be a norm. Okay, so at this time, there's a lot of controversy about masks. I'm going to get into this first bullet point. So one of the tools of simulated high altitude training is wearing a mask, because of course then you're making it harder for yourself to breathe. And then what happens, like I've been talking about, is what was once difficult becomes easy. And so then somebody might train marathon running with one of these big masks like this woman is wearing, more like a gas mask or something, not a little fabric mask. And then, my goodness, when you do your event with nothing on your face, all of a sudden it's so easy. So anyway, that's the rationale behind that. And then again, the idea of the progressive breath holding. So maybe somebody might start taking very light pauses while they're breathing sedentary, and then start doing the same thing while they're walking, and then ultimately running. And so again, just making it more difficult, breathing less. And then breathing, another way of saying that is breathing more gently. Okay. When you're doing breathing training, it's really important to kind of make the invisible visible. Kind of notice what you start doing is, it's like when they talk about the Eskimos having 60 words for snow. We have a lot of different ways of looking at our breathing. And I love taking measurements. Your heart rate correlates, as I mentioned when I showed Dr. Buteko's chart, with the amount of time typically that you are able to hold your breath. So when I hike, I'm taking my heart rate. I want to make sure at the end of my workout, it's where it was at the beginning of my workout, so I'm not over breathing going into the rest of my day, which typically would be sedentary. You can also use a metronome. When I was a kid learning how to play the clarinet, I'm not even going to tell you how long ago, I had a metronome. Now I don't even need an app. I just go to Google, I type in metronome, I get something beating 60 beats per minute, and I can count without having to look at something. R rate, tap rate are apps that you can get your respiration rate. And then, of course, there's all the distance steps logs that are just freely available. So I have clients using all of these just to gather information. So what you want to do is, I call it, take your breathing stats. Be aware of what they are. And the more you do these activities, the more the stats will improve. Okay. Tools that you can use in the course of this work are nasal strips. These are, I know Breathe Right is a popular brand name, and then all the drugstores have their own house brands. These are marketed to people who snore. But if people have been mouth breathing and they're training to do more nasal breathing now, you can use these nasal strips, and they widen your nostrils so there's more airflow. And when I get a cold, have used them, and they worked great when I needed them. Nasal stents, that's the product in the middle. That's kind of the same purpose, but they're these little plastic cones that increase the nostril volume from the inside. That's not as interesting to me. I don't really want to clean those. I bought them just to be aware of them, try them out, see the benefits and the pitfalls, but that's as far as it went for me. I use mouth tape a lot. I think that's a training tool. People, when they're watching a movie, watching videos. There's a period of time when they're not going to be talking. Can use tape to make sure that their mouth is shut and that they are nasal breathing. And it's just a way of building your chops. I talked about logging. Okay, I want to talk about when breathing coaching might be appropriate. And because people talk all the time about, like, why would I need someone to show me how to breathe? I'm not exactly sure. Well, here's why. I'm going to get a call here. Because breathing has biomechanical, biochemical, and psychophysiological aspects. So sometimes we can notice somebody's breathing pattern and see where they're having difficulties and what exercises they maybe should concentrate on. So in that case, you could get a professional breathing assessment, and we can give you a recommendation for which tools to focus on and in what sequence. A lot of times people think that they actually are doing something correctly and they're not. So it's good to have an educated observer sometimes. Other people want an accountability partner. There is a time, this is one of those things where once you really learn what you're looking for, you don't have to focus on it as much, but there is a time when you need more intensity. And some people just really prefer to have an accountability partner or help building momentum. A lot of people will reach a plateau and then they need some advice how to carry it forward. And the last point is just when I was talking about the fear factor before, that we our breathing pattern is also a reflection of our emotions. And when we slow down our breathing, a lot of people, and I was in this category, so I'm speaking from knowledge here, a lot of people are distracting themselves because they don't want to think about certain things. And when you slow down your breathing, you feel more of your emotions and more space is created. So if there's something that you don't want to look at, this type of breathing is going to bring it up. And that's valid. That's very valid. And so there are ways to slow things down, to make them more mechanical, so that you're really just doing the physical actions without engaging the mind. So that can sometimes be valuable. So those are some reasons why you might need some help, and I'm very happy to help anybody who thinks they might need it or have a conversation with you. So here is my telephone number and ways to reach me. And I wish you the best of luck. Exercising becomes so much more of a joy when I started engaging, I'll just speak for myself, when I started engaging in better breathing practices. Because most people, it's really when they say they're out of shape. Somebody's muscles can hurt the next day, but a lot of times it's getting up that hill. It's very difficult. So maybe the next time you go hiking, identify what is running out of juice here. Is it my muscles or is it my respiratory capacity? Thank you very much. And I wish you a great off season.